What's the worst thing that happened as a result of speaking a second language? I was detained at the airport with my elderly adoptive mother, getting pressured into admitting we were Russian spies, while my literal wedding was starting in 5 hours. 3 weeks prior, I was in the bathroom at our engagement party when my adoptive mom called. We spoke in Russian because that's the only language she's ever known. My fiance's cousin Lauren walked in while I was mid-conversation. She froze, staring at me in the mirror reflection. When I hung up, she asked, "Who was that?" My mom, speaking not English. She looked confused. "Yeah, she's from Moscow," I replied, but Lauren kept staring. "I thought your mom was American?" "My birth mom is, but my adoptive mom isn't." Lauren left without another word. 2 weeks later, I flew out to Moscow to collect her. She's nervous about flying alone, so the plan was to get her then fly back in time for the wedding. But our flight got delayed a whole 22 hours. Instead of landing Thursday night, we'd land Saturday at 10 a.m. 5 hours until the wedding. I was already in a hurry when at customs they pulled us aside for secondary screening. 2 officers showed up immediately separating us, commented on how much of a hurry we were in. My mom was confused and tried to ask me what was happening in Russian, but when I tried to tell her, one of the officers barked, "English only," before dragging us into our own separate rooms. Before I knew it, I had my wrists cuffed to a metal chair, with the cuffs too tight making my fingers go numb. This is insane. My wedding is at 3 p.m. 200 people are waiting. "Shut up," Officer Claxton said while Officer Dalton dumped my purses into evidence bags. My face went white when I saw my mom's heart medication bottle fall out. "You were reported for espionage." Claxton slid photos across the table showing screenshots of my texts with mom all in Russian. "Your mother already confessed." My eyes bugged out. "Confessed to what?" "To everything. Moscow. Your handler." I was in disbelief. "My wedding starts in 4 hours. This is ridiculous. Should have thought about that before betraying America." That's when I heard a crash from next door, followed by my mom screaming. I jerked against the cuffs hard enough to cut my wrists. "What are you doing to her?" "Someone's in there teaching her English, probably." Dalton laughed. I could hear my mom gasping through the wall, sobbing. Dalton cracked the door and was smiling. "Old lady's clutching her chest, says she can't breathe." Oscar-worthy performance. "She has a heart condition," I yelled at them. "Her medication. There were no pills in her purse," Claxton lied, staring at the orange prescription bottle in the clear bag right there on the table. "I can see it. Right there. That's evidence now, and evidence doesn't get used on terrorists." I heard furniture scraping next door, my mom's voice getting weaker. Someone yelled, "Get medics," and my wrists were bleeding from pulling against the cuffs. "Please help her. We ran a background check on you already," he told me. "Your fiance's aerospace engineer job. That was security clearance." Claxton continued, "He's unemployed now, career destroyed, his military family under investigation, all because of you." I heard EMTs running down the hallway, their radio crackling. "Room B, elderly female, no pulse." "No pulse?" I yanked so hard the chair scraped forward. "Help her. She's faking," Dalton said. "Russians die dramatically on purpose." They wheeled a gurney past our door, my mom on it gray-faced with an EMT pumping her chest. "Mom." She didn't move. "She won't even look at you," Claxton said. "Ashamed she raised a traitor like you." I heard the defibrillator charging in the hallway. "Clear." The electric thunk made me flinch. "No response." "Again." "Please," I sobbed with blood running down my arms. "Help her." "Why?" "She's Russian," Dalton said. Another thunk. Still nothing. Claxton picked up my mom's prescription bottle, shaking it so I could hear the pills rattling. "Me to pro lol. Should we give this to them?" "Nah," Dalton said. "Let's see what happens." "You're killing her." "We're not doing anything. Her weak heart is killing her. We're just watching it happen," Claxton said. I heard more shouting, the defibrillator charging again and again, thuds, compressions. "We're losing her," and Claxton leaned close. "Know what's funny? The pills are right here. We could save her anytime. But why would we save a threat to this great nation?" I couldn't speak, just sobbed listening to them shocking her over and over. "Still nothing. Continue compressions." Dalton then pulled out his phone and showed me his phone with a photo he'd found online. My fiance and I 3 weeks ago from the engagement party, him kneeling and kissing my hand. "It's 12 p.m., Claxton said. "Your wedding's happening in 2 hours right now without you. Your mom will probably be dead any minute, and your fiance will hate you when he learns the truth. So here's what happens next. You confess to espionage, or spend life in prison while everyone you love suffers for your lies." I stared at Claxton's face while my wrists throbbed against the metal cuffs, blood running down my arms and pooling on the table. My mom was maybe dying right outside, and my wedding was starting in less than 2 hours with 200 guests already arriving. The defibrillator kept charging in the hallway, each electric thunk making me flinch harder while Claxton waited for me to confess to being a spy. I opened my mouth to say something, anything that might save her, when shouting erupted from the hallway. Someone with real authority was yelling about cardiac patients and withheld medication, their voice getting closer to our door. The door slammed open so hard it bounced off the wall, and Commander Alonzo Grimes stormed in, his face bright red as his eyes locked onto my bloody wrists. He saw the orange prescription bottle sitting right there on the table in the evidence bag, and his whole body went rigid. "Uncuff her now!" he barked at Claxton, who fumbled for his keys while Grimes grabbed the prescription bottle. Dalton started explaining about the espionage report, but Grimes cut him off with a hand motion that made both officers step back. "Nothing justifies withholding life-saving medication from a cardiac patient. Nothing." The EMTs rushed back into the room next door with my mom's pills, and I could hear them through the thin wall crushing the tablets and mixing them with water. They were checking her vitals again, someone saying her pulse was coming back weak but steady while they prepped the gurney for transport. Grimes told me I'd be allowed to go with her under supervision once they processed some paperwork, but first he needed to document my injuries. The cuffs finally came off, and my hands were so numb I couldn't move my fingers at first, just watched the blood drip onto the floor. An FBI agent walked in wearing a dark suit, showing his badge to everyone before announcing he was taking over the case. Agent Ruben Atkinson said this fell under federal jurisdiction now and started setting up a camera on the table. He read me my Miranda rights while recording everything, his voice calm and professional, unlike the screaming from before. "Do you want to make a statement?" he asked, but I shook my head. "I need a lawyer, but I have to get to my mom first, please." He nodded and made a phone call, arranging for a telephone interpreter to help explain things properly while we waited for transport. Within minutes, a woman's voice came through the speakerphone, introducing herself as a certified Russian interpreter who could help bridge the language gap. I explained through tears that my mom only speaks Russian because she never learned English after adopting me as a baby from Moscow. She's been living there her whole life, and I'm the only family she has, which is why I flew out to get her for the wedding. Agent Atkinson took notes on everything, actually listening instead of just accusing, and seemed genuinely interested in understanding what really happened. I told him about the engagement party 3 weeks ago when Lauren walked in on my phone call with Mom in the bathroom. I described how her face changed when she heard Russian, how she kept asking about my real mom like my adoptive mom didn't count. She left without saying anything else, but I could tell something was wrong by how cold she got. Agent Atkinson wrote down Lauren's full name and contact information, asking specific questions about what she might have heard or misunderstood. He pulled out the supposed confession that Claxton claimed my mom gave and started reading it out loud. The document said she admitted to being my handler and coordinating espionage activities, but it was all in perfect English. This makes no sense for someone who doesn't speak English, he said, looking at both officers. He ordered them to write detailed statements about their interrogation methods, and specifically who authorized withholding the heart medication. Claxton's face went white as he realized the tables were turning and Grimes was standing behind him taking his own notes. They finally let me use a phone to call my fiancé, but it went straight to voicemail, which meant he had it silenced for the ceremony. My hands were shaking, so bad I could barely hold the phone as I left a message. Baby, I'm detained at the airport. Mom had a heart attack. The wedding can't happen. I'm so sorry. I love you. My voice broke on the last words, and I had to hang up before I started sobbing again. Commander Grimes personally walked me to the bathroom, standing outside while I ran cold water over my wrists. He handed me his phone so I could take photos of the cuts with the case number visible in the frame. He gave me bandages and gauze from a first aid kit, muttering about liability and lawsuits while avoiding looking directly at me. I could tell he knew his officers had screwed up bad and was already thinking about damage control. Something doesn't add up about Lauren hearing one phone call in Russian and jumping straight to spy. That's quite a leap from just overhearing a different language at a party. The hospital called Agent Atkinson's phone saying my mom was rushed to the ICU for emergency procedures. They needed consent for treatment and someone who could explain the medical terms in Russian so she'd understand what was happening. Agent Atkinson brought in Karina DuPont, a certified Russian interpreter who worked with the FBI on cases like this. She promised she'd stay with my mom at the hospital so she wouldn't be alone and confused while they treated her. Karina spoke to me in Russian for a moment, her accent familiar and comforting, telling me my mom would be okay and she'd make sure the doctors understood her needs. Agent Atkinson pulled up our flight records on his laptop while I sat there with my bandaged wrists throbbing. He scrolled through the booking confirmation from 3 months ago, the Moscow hotel reservation, the connecting flights that got delayed because of weather. His eyebrows went up when he saw the wedding venue contract dated 6 months back with the deposit paid in full. He clicked through more screens showing our return tickets, the car rental, everything matching exactly what I'd been trying to tell them. His whole face changed as he kept reading, jaw tightening when he saw the timeline proved we'd been trying to make it to the wedding, not sneaking into the country for some spy mission. Commander Grimes leaned over his shoulder looking at the same documents, and I heard him mutter something about a lawsuit waiting to happen. My phone started buzzing on the table where they'd dumped it from the evidence bag. The wedding planner's name flashed on the screen with message after message asking where I was, saying the guests were getting restless. The musicians were asking if they should start. The photographer wanted to know if we were running late. Then my fiancé's family group chat exploded with notifications. His mom's message popped up first asking if the rumors were true about me being detained. His dad's message right after said something about always wondering about my background. More messages flooded in from his cousins, his sister, everyone asking questions and spreading what they'd heard. My hands shook so bad I could barely hold the phone to read them. Agent Atkinson took the phone from me and screenshot everything for his files before handing it back. He asked about my fiancé's job at the aerospace company, writing down the security clearance level and project details. When I told him about Claxton saying he'd already been fired, Atkinson's face got dark and he wrote faster in his notebook. He explained that any real investigation would have to clear my fiancé too, since he hadn't done anything wrong, but his report would carry more weight than whatever garbage CBP had started. The disgust in his voice when he talked about how this was handled made me feel slightly less crazy. He stood up and said I could go to the hospital now, but I'd have to wear restraints through the terminal for security protocol until we got to his vehicle. The metal clicked around my already injured wrists, and I bit my lip to keep from crying out. We walked through the busy terminal with hundreds of people staring, phones coming out to take pictures and videos. I kept my head down but knew my face would be everywhere online within minutes, as the Russian spy bride who got caught at the airport. Each step felt like walking through mud, my legs shaking from exhaustion and humiliation burning through me worse than the cuts on my wrists. Agent Atkinson kept one hand on my elbow, guiding me past the crowds while people whispered and pointed. At the hospital, the cardiologist met us in a small consultation room and pulled up my mom's charts on his computer. He explained she'd gone into full cardiac arrest from the combination of extreme stress and missing her metoprolol doses. They got her back, but she'd been without oxygen for several minutes, and they were still running tests to see how much damage happened to her heart muscle. When I asked if she would have been fine if she'd had her pills, he looked uncomfortable and said timing was critical in cardiac events, that every minute without proper medication increased the risk. He wouldn't say directly that withholding her pills almost killed her, but his eyes said everything. They finally let me see her in the ICU, machines beeping everywhere and tubes running into her arms. She looked so small in that huge bed, her skin gray like paper, nothing like the strong woman who raised me. When I whispered to her in Russian that I was there and she was safe, her eyes fluttered open just barely. Her fingers squeezed mine with almost no strength while tears rolled down both our faces. Agent Atkinson stood in the doorway watching us, and I saw his expression soften as he realized we were just a scared family, not some international threat. My phone rang with my fiancé's ringtone and my stomach dropped. His voice sounded empty when he told me he'd canceled the ceremony after getting my voicemail, that everyone had gone home confused and angry. His parents were losing their minds, his dad going on about disgracing their military family's reputation and how this would follow them forever. His job had already called to say he couldn't come back until the federal investigation cleared him completely. He said he still loved me, but his voice was flat, broken, like something inside him had died. Agent Atkinson told me I was released on my own recognizance, but they'd keep our passports and phones as evidence for now. He handed me a case number and business card, explaining I'd need to come in for follow-up interviews over the next few weeks. He was marking this as wrongful detention, and his report would help clear things up faster, but the relief felt hollow knowing the damage was already permanent. Walking back through the hospital hallway, I saw Claxton and Dalton near the elevator with their their union rep and someone from internal affairs. They glared at me like I'd ruined their lives by not confessing to their made-up charges. I heard them talking about how they'd followed protocol, how the tip was credible, how they couldn't have known the old woman really had a heart condition. The union rep was already working on their defense, and I knew they'd probably get away with nearly killing my mom. I collapsed in a waiting room chair, still wearing the same clothes from the Moscow flight, knowing my wedding dress was hanging in our apartment where nobody would ever see it. The florist was probably boxing up the arrangements to donate, the venue giving away our 5-tier cake to homeless shelters, and 200 people were posting on social media about the crazy Russian spy wedding that never happened. My phone buzzed with a text from someone I didn't know saying they were sending help. 20 minutes later, a woman in a navy suit walked into the waiting room looking for me. She introduced herself as Brigitte Ahmed, a civil rights attorney, and said my friend Sarah saw everything online and called her office. Brigitte pulled out her phone and started taking photos of my wrists, the dried blood on my sleeves, and the bruises forming under the bandages. She asked me to tell her everything that happened from the beginning while she recorded on her phone. I explained about Lauren hearing Russian at the party, the detention, my mom's heart attack, everything. She kept shaking her head and taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I mentioned they withheld my mom's medication while she was dying, she stopped writing and looked up at me. She said this was exactly why she became a lawyer, to fight this kind of abuse. She pulled out forms and started filling them out right there in the hospital waiting room. She explained she was filing a complaint with the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Professional Responsibility. She also wrote something called preservation letters to send to the airport demanding they save all video footage and documents. She told me this would take months or maybe years, but we needed to document everything while it was fresh. When I asked about paying her, she said she worked on contingency for cases like this. She knew we couldn't afford legal fees right now with everything happening. She gave me her card and said to call her anytime, day or night, if anything else happened. That evening, the doctor said my mom was stable enough that I could leave for a few hours. I took an Uber to my fiance's apartment and found him sitting in the dark living room. He hadn't turned on any lights and was just staring at the wall. When he saw me, we both started crying and held each other on the couch. We were both so tired and broken from how fast everything fell apart. He told me about canceling the ceremony, calling all the vendors, dealing with angry relatives. I told him about my mom almost dying, the officers laughing about it, the pills they wouldn't give her. We agreed we couldn't even think about having a wedding right now. The idea of celebrating anything felt impossible after what happened. His phone kept buzzing with texts from his parents, but he didn't answer them. Finally, he showed me what they were saying. His mom wrote that they needed to protect the family reputation, and maybe we should take some time apart. His dad's messages were worse, saying I'd put their whole family under scrutiny. He said his own security clearance from his military days might get reviewed because of me. The rejection hurt almost as much as the detention itself because I thought they'd be my family. My fiancé told them to stop, but they kept sending more messages about how this would follow them forever. The next morning, Brigitte called early and told me not to talk to any reporters who were trying to reach me. She said the story was spreading online and journalists were digging for more details. She warned that anything I said could get twisted and used against us later. She said we needed to let the legal process work without giving them ammunition. The way Brigitte just showed up makes me wonder how Sarah found her so fast. Does she keep a list of civil rights lawyers ready for emergencies? It was hard to stay quiet when I saw people online spreading lies about us being actual spies. Some comments said we deserved what happened, that speaking foreign languages was suspicious. Agent Atkinson called around noon with an update on his preliminary review. He said he'd found serious misconduct by the CBP officers, but warned the full investigation would be slow. He'd interviewed other passengers from our flight who all said we just looked confused and scared. They confirmed we weren't acting suspicious, just rushing because we were late. It was small vindication, but it helped to know someone official believed us. The hospital billing department started calling that afternoon about my mom's ICU stay. The woman on the phone read numbers that made my stomach drop. 3 days in the ICU, the cardiac procedures, all the medications and monitoring. It was adding up to more than I made in a year. My mom never qualified for Medicare because of her immigration status, and my employer insurance didn't cover her. The financial nightmare was starting on top of everything else we were dealing with. The billing person said they'd send paperwork for payment plans, but I knew we couldn't afford even the monthly minimums. Karina, the interpreter from the hospital, had been visiting my mom every day to help her understand what was happening. She brought Russian magazines and sat with her when I couldn't be there. One day she told me about her own experience being detained for speaking Russian on a plane years ago. Security had pulled her off the flight and questioned her for hours just because someone complained about her phone conversation. She started volunteering after that to help other Russian speakers caught in the same system. She helped us fill out applications for charity care at the hospital and translated all the financial documents. She knew which forms to submit and which departments to contact for help. My fiancé got a call from his employer extending his administrative leave, but they stopped his pay completely. They said they couldn't pay him while the investigation was pending, even though he'd done nothing wrong. We had the mortgage payment coming up, wedding deposits we were still paying off, and now massive hospital bills. He started applying for temporary work, but anywhere that required security clearance was off limits now. Even retail jobs were hesitant when they Googled his name and saw the news stories. He was an aerospace engineer reduced to begging for minimum wage work because of a false accusation. Brigitte filed more paperwork, something called a Federal Tort Claims Act complaint against the government. She also submitted multiple Freedom of Information Act requests to get all records from our detention. She explained we needed every document, every video, every email about our case for the civil lawsuit. She warned me this process alone would take months minimum just to get the documents. The legal system moved at a crawl while our lives stayed frozen in this nightmare. Agent Atkinson called me 3 days later to tell me he'd interviewed Lauren about the tip she'd called in. He said she'd admitted calling the tip line right after our engagement party because hearing me speak Russian seemed suspicious to her. She'd told him she was just being a good American and trying to protect the country from potential threats. He said she seemed really proud of herself at first, explaining how she'd recorded our conversation at the party and sent screenshots of my text with my mom to the tip line. She'd even looked up articles about Russian sleeper agents and sent those too, telling him she thought she was doing her duty. But when he explained what actually happened to us, how my mom almost died and my fiancé lost his job, she got quiet and started saying she didn't mean for any of that to happen. Agent Atkinson said she kept repeating that she was just trying to help, that she thought the authorities would just check us out and clear us if we weren't doing anything wrong. The urge to drive to her house and scream at her was so strong I had to grip the phone until my knuckles went white. Brigitte called me right after and told me absolutely no contact with Lauren under any circumstances. She explained that anything I said or did could be twisted and used against us in the civil case, that I needed to be smart, not emotional. She said Lauren's lawyers would love nothing more than for me to confront her, so they could paint me as unstable or aggressive. I hung up and punched a pillow until my arms hurt, then sat in my car outside Lauren's apartment building for an hour just staring at her window before driving away. 2 weeks passed with more paperwork and waiting until I finally had my official interview with the OPR investigator. She met me at a federal building downtown, a middle-aged woman who introduced herself as an investigator, but never gave her name. She recorded everything on 3 different devices and had me go through every single detail of the detention from start to finish. She asked specific questions about Claxton and Dalton, about the medication, about the cuffs being too tight. She showed me photos of my injured wrists that Agent Atkinson had taken and asked me to describe how they got that way. When I told her about them shaking the pill bottle while my mom was coding, she stopped writing and looked up at me. She said she'd heard concerning things about those officers before, but couldn't give me details. She asked if I had any witnesses to them denying the medication, and I told her about Commander Grimes walking in and seeing everything. She took notes about that and said she'd be interviewing him too. When I left after 3 hours of questions, she shook my hand and said she'd do her best, but warned me not to expect much from the system. 3 weeks after the detention, they finally moved my mom from the ICU to a regular hospital room. She was weak and confused, needing help with everything from eating to using the bathroom. The cardiac arrest had done damage that would require months of rehabilitation and monitoring. Every time I visited, she'd grab my hand and apologize in Russian for ruining my wedding, saying she should have just stayed in Moscow. I kept telling her none of this was her fault, that we were just caught up in a broken system that sees enemies everywhere. She'd cry and say she was too much trouble, that I should have left her there and gotten married like I planned. The nurses had to keep adjusting her medications because the stress was making her heart rhythm unstable. Karina kept visiting to help translate and comfort her, bringing Russian books and foods that reminded her of home. The physical therapist said she'd need weeks more in the hospital and then months of outpatient cardiac rehab if she ever wanted to live independently again. That same week, my fiancé got the official termination letter from the aerospace company. They cited the ongoing investigation as making him too high a security risk regardless of the outcome. 5 years of specialized work on classified projects, gone because his fiancé's cousin heard a foreign language and got scared. He'd been one of their top engineers, working on guidance systems for satellites, and now they wouldn't even give him a reference. He started drinking beer in the afternoon, then whiskey at night, sitting on the couch staring at nothing. I'd find him looking at photos from his old job, group pictures with his team, awards he'd won for his designs. He kept saying he understood why they had to let him go, but I could see it was killing him inside. When he started hiding bottles in the garage, I knew we needed help before he spiraled completely. Brigitte connected us with a therapist who specialized in trauma from wrongful detention and discrimination. The first session was awkward, both of us sitting on opposite ends of a couch not knowing what to say. The therapist asked us to describe what happened and we took turns filling in pieces, sometimes correcting each other or adding details the other forgot. She helped us see how the trauma affected us differently, how I was angry and wanted to fight while he was withdrawing and self-medicating. We started going twice a week, slowly learning to talk about the fear and rage without taking it out on each other. Some sessions ended with us holding each other and crying, others with us barely speaking on the drive home. The therapist gave us exercises to do together, ways to rebuild trust and connection when everything else felt broken. Progress was slow, and some days we felt like we were going backwards, but at least we were trying to heal instead of just drowning. 6 weeks after the detention, Brigitte called to tell me the OPR investigation had concluded. Claxton and Dalton were getting what they called administrative actions, which meant a brief suspension and reassignment to different positions. They'd keep their jobs, their pensions, their benefits, everything except their current posts. Brigitte said this was typical, that the system protects its own no matter what they do. She'd seen officers who'd done worse get even less punishment. The official report said they'd violated protocols but not criminally, that their actions were inappropriate but not illegal. I threw my phone across the room when she told me, shattering the screen against the wall. 2 days later, a letter arrived from the prosecutor's office saying they were declining to file any charges against us. The letter stated there was insufficient evidence of espionage to proceed with prosecution. Insufficient evidence, as if there had been any evidence at all beyond me speaking Russian to my elderly mother. They returned our phones and passports with a form letter that thanked us for our cooperation, but never actually apologized for anything. The phones had been wiped clean, and the passports had void stamps that had been crossed out. Lauren recorded private conversations and screenshots of personal texts to send to authorities. The timing right after their engagement party feels really calculated. I wonder if there's something deeper than just fear driving her actions here. Maybe jealousy or personal issues we don't know about yet. My fiancé and I decided to get married at the courthouse the next week with just 2 witnesses from his office. No family invited, no white dress, no flowers or music or cake. We stood in front of a judge for 5 minutes and exchanged simple vows about choosing each other through everything. We promised to stand together against whatever came next, to not let the system break us apart. It wasn't the wedding we'd planned for a year, but somehow it felt more real after everything we'd survived. The judge pronounced us married, and we kissed while our witnesses took a single photo on a phone. We went for burgers afterwards and tried to pretend it was a celebration, even though we both felt hollow. After everything that happened, we started taking precautions that felt crazy, but necessary. We installed recording apps on our phones that backed up to the cloud automatically. We kept lawyers' numbers saved in our contacts and written on cards in our wallets. Every interaction with any authority got documented with times, dates, names, and badge numbers. We bought a dashboard camera for the car and security cameras for the apartment. My husband practiced saying, "I don't consent to searches, and I'm exercising my right to remain silent," until he could say them without his voice shaking. We kept copies of all our documents in a safety deposit box and with Brigitte's office. The paranoia felt awful, but we knew now how fast your whole life could be destroyed by someone's fear and prejudice. My mom got discharged from the hospital 3 weeks later and moved into our spare bedroom while she recovered. I set up a small table with her tea set from Moscow and hung the old calendar she'd brought showing Russian Orthodox saints. She couldn't walk without help at first, gripping my arm to shuffle to the bathroom while apologizing in Russian for being a burden. My husband started learning basic phrases videos from an app on his phone, practicing Dobroje Utro every morning when he brought her tea. His pronunciation was terrible, but she smiled every time he tried. His parents came by one afternoon and watched him stumble through, asking if she wanted more soup in broken Russian. His mother stood in the doorway watching my mom pat his hand and correct his words gently, then later pulled me aside in the kitchen. I was wrong about her, she said quietly. She's just a grandmother who loves you. 2 months after everything, I went back to work at the marketing firm where I'd been for 3 years. The receptionist avoided eye contact when I walked in. My desk was exactly how I'd left it before the wedding that never happened. Even the sticky note reminding me to pick up my dress still stuck to my monitor. People whispered when I walked to the break room. Some coworkers brought me coffee and said they were glad I was back, but others literally turned and walked the other way when they saw me coming. My boss called me into his office that first week back. "We need to discuss your role here," he said, sliding papers across his desk. "Given the media attention, we think you'd be happier in our research department." Research meant no client meetings, no presentations, just sitting in a back office analyzing data. Same pay, but invisible. I took the transfer because we needed the income. My husband had been applying everywhere for engineering jobs, but kept getting rejected after background checks. He finally got an offer from a small manufacturing company doing basic CAD work, nothing like the spacecraft components he used to design. The pay was half what he made in aerospace. He accepted it without complaining, but I caught him one night looking at photos from a Mars rover launch where one of his designs was used. He closed the laptop when he saw me watching. Brigitte called every few weeks with updates on our civil case against the government. 4 months after the detention, they offered $20,000 to make it go away. "That won't even cover your mom's ICU bills," she told me over the phone. "They're testing to see if you'll take anything." We rejected it. They came back with $50,000 but wanted us to sign papers saying we couldn't talk about what happened. Brigitte told them no. A legal assistant delivered a thick envelope to our apartment one morning. Lauren's lawyer had sent a 3-page letter where she wanted to explain her side and apologize. I read the first line about how she never meant for things to go so far, then walked to the kitchen and held it over the stove burner. The paper curled and blackened while my husband watched from the doorway. "Whatever you need to do," he said. 6 months after that day at the airport, I was helping my mom get dressed when her left arm suddenly went limp. Her face drooped on one side and she couldn't form words, just made scared sounds while grabbing at me with her good hand. The EMTs said it was a stroke, probably related to the damage from her cardiac arrest. She spent another week in the hospital learning to use a walker. The physical therapist said she'd have permanent weakness on her left side. Now when she tried to open jars or button her shirt, her left hand wouldn't cooperate. Every time I watched her struggle with simple tasks, I remembered Claxton shaking that pill bottle while she was dying. Agent Atkinson flew in to testify at our civil trial 7 months after everything started. He sat in the witness box in his dark suit and carefully explained how CBP had violated multiple protocols. He confirmed there was never any evidence of espionage, that the detention was based solely on a tip about speaking Russian. The government lawyer kept objecting, but Atkinson just waited and then continued with his facts. Having a federal agent on our side felt like something, even if it was small. The settlement talks dragged on for weeks after that. The government lawyers offered more money, first $100,000, then $200,000, but always with gag orders attached. They wanted us to sign papers saying no wrongdoing occurred, that it was all a misunderstanding. Brigitte kept telling them the same thing in every meeting. "My clients would rather go to trial than let you hide this." They'd huddle and whisper, then come back with a slightly different version of the same bad deal. 9 months after the detention, my husband got an email from a startup doing underwater drone navigation. They'd seen his work from before and didn't care about the investigation. The pay was less than his old aerospace job, but more than the manufacturing place. He came home that first day talking fast about the prototypes they were building, showing me sketches on napkins like he used to do. His eyes had that spark again when he explained how they were solving stabilization problems. Finally, almost a year after that day at the airport, the government lawyers showed up with a different offer. $350,000, no gag order, though they still admitted no wrongdoing in the official papers. It covered the medical bills, legal fees, and left us with enough to start over. Brigitte said it wasn't justice, but it was the best we'd get without years more fighting. We signed the papers in her conference room while my mom sat in her wheelchair beside us, her good hand holding mine. 2 weeks after signing those papers, Karina called about a new immigrant advocacy center opening downtown that needed volunteers. I showed up the next morning and found myself sorting intake forms for families dealing with detention issues. My mom came with me the third week, bringing homemade tea cakes for the other Russian speakers who gathered in the break room. She'd sit with them for hours, her good hand gesturing while her weak left arm stayed in her lap, sharing stories about the airport and watching their faces go pale, then angry. The center had me translating documents and explaining legal processes to confused families who reminded me of us a year ago. One mother sobbed into my shoulder when I helped her fill out visitor forms for her detained husband. My mom would pat their backs with her good hand and speak soft Russian words that somehow helped even when they didn't understand the language. 3 months into volunteering, my husband got an unexpected email from his old aerospace company. The hiring manager wrote that they'd reviewed his case and wanted to offer him his position back with a promotion and back pay. He read it to me over dinner, then deleted it without responding. His startup had just landed a contract for underwater navigation systems, and he spent every evening sketching designs on napkins again. He told me later that going back would feel like accepting their betrayal meant nothing. Almost exactly 1 year after that horrible day at the airport, we invited everyone who'd stood by us to our apartment for dinner, just 20 people instead of 200, but every single one had proven their loyalty when things got bad. My mom spent 3 days cooking with her good hand while I chopped vegetables and stirred pots. She insisted on making all the Russian dishes from my childhood, even though her left hand couldn't grip properly anymore. When everyone arrived, she stood up from her wheelchair and raised a glass of water in her good hand. Karina translated while my mom thanked each person by name for not abandoning us when the system tried to break our family. People cried into their borscht and hugged us until my ribs hurt. 2 weeks later at my husband's nephew's birthday party, I was refilling my drink when Lauren walked up behind me. She started saying my name, but I turned and walked straight past her to the other side of the yard. My husband's mother saw the whole thing and actually stepped between us when Lauren tried to follow. His dad showed Lauren the stack of medical bills we'd given them copies of, pointing at the cardiac arrest treatment costs. Lauren left the party 20 minutes later, and nobody said goodbye to her. How did they go from losing everything to rebuilding so carefully? Those security cameras and lawyer numbers show such smart planning after what happened makes me wonder if recording everything actually helped them feel safer or just reminded them daily of that terrible day. My mom had been studying for her citizenship test with Karina every Tuesday for 6 months. They'd sit at our kitchen table with flashcards while my mom's good hand traced the words and her weak hand lay still in her lap. The day of her naturalization ceremony, she wore the dress she'd bought for my wedding that never happened. When they called her name, she walked slowly to the podium without her wheelchair, even though I knew her left leg was weak. She raised her right hand and spoke the oath in broken English, every word careful and deliberate. She told me afterwards she wanted to belong to the country where her daughter lived, even after everything they'd done to us. That same week, a journalist named Tunde Vasquez called Brigitte about the OPR investigation documents that had somehow leaked to him. The article came out 3 days later with photos of Claxton and Dalton in their uniforms, next to excerpts from the investigation showing they'd withheld medication. The story went viral within hours, and protesters showed up at the CBP office demanding accountability. The agency announced an emergency review, and 2 weeks later, both officers took early retirement with reduced pensions. They lost their law enforcement credentials permanently and couldn't work security anywhere that required background checks. My husband's startup got acquired by a tech giant 8 months after he'd started there. The equity payout came to more than he would have made in 5 years at the aerospace company. We sat in our car outside the bank after depositing the check, both of us laughing at the insane irony. He said Lauren accidentally gave us financial freedom by destroying his old career. We'd never thank her for the trauma, but the money definitely helped us rebuild. We spent months looking at houses until we found one with a perfect mother-in-law suite that had grab bars already installed and wide doorways for her wheelchair. My mom cried when she saw the little kitchen where she could cook without help and the garden plot visible from her window. She planted tomatoes and dill the first week, then beets and potatoes, all the vegetables from her Moscow childhood. The neighbors started stopping by for fresh produce, and she'd tell them in her broken English about surviving the airport detention. They called her a hero and brought her seedlings for next season. My new company specifically recruited me because of my Russian fluency and international experience. During the interview, they said they wanted someone who understood different cultures and could navigate complex situations. My boss introduced me as their secret weapon for Eastern European partnerships. Nobody whispered about my background or suggested I hide who I was. They paid me 30% more than my last job and sponsored my mom's medical insurance. When Brigitte called about speaking at a civil rights conference, my husband and I both said yes immediately. We stood on stage in front of 300 law enforcement trainers and immigration attorneys, telling our story with photos of my mom in the ICU on the screen behind us. My voice shook describing the officers shaking her pill bottle while she was dying, but I kept going. When we finished, the entire room stood up and applauded for 2 full minutes. Several officers came up afterwards to apologize for their colleagues and promised they'd train their teams better. A month later, my husband rushed into the kitchen waving a printed article about a Mars rover component his startup had designed. He grabbed the courthouse wedding photo from the counter and held them together. His eyes bright with tears, he was trying not to cry. His dad called that afternoon and actually said the words we'd been waiting to hear about how proud he was that we'd fought through everything. 3 years passed before we had our daughter, and from day one, my mom sang her the same Russian songs she'd sung to me as a baby. My husband sat next to them every night practicing the words, stumbling through pronunciations while our little girl giggled at his attempts. The 3 of them would sit for hours, my mom teaching him children's rhymes while the baby babbled in both languages like it was the most normal thing in the world. The immigrant advocacy group called one Tuesday asking if they could name their new legal defense fund after my mom. She didn't understand at first when Karina translated it, then started crying so hard she couldn't speak for 10 minutes. At the announcement ceremony, she stood at the podium and said in her broken English that nobody should suffer like we did, and the whole room stood up clapping. The fund raised $40,000 in the first month and helped 17 families fight wrongful detentions that year. Agent Atkinson sent an email saying he'd left the FBI to teach at a police academy in Virginia. He wrote that he uses our case in every single class to show what happens when officers abuse their power. He'd already trained 300 new officers who knew our story and promised they'd never let it happen again. We planned our real wedding reception for 5 years after the original date, sending invitations only to people who'd stood by us. My mom rolled down the aisle in her wheelchair, wearing the dress she'd bought for the first wedding, and nobody cared what language we spoke our vows in. The room had maybe 50 people, but every single one had proven their loyalty when things got hard. My husband's company got bought by Boeing, and suddenly his security clearance mattered again for the contracts they wanted. The letter came 2 weeks later, fully reinstating his clearance with an official apology from the Department of Defense. He framed it next to the Mars article and our wedding photo, calling it his wall of vindication. Looking back at everything, I know I wouldn't choose this path if I could go back and warn myself in that bathroom at the engagement party, but we became fighters because we had to be, advocates because nobody else would speak up, and survivors because giving up wasn't an option. Our love survived being tested in ways most couples never face, and we're stronger for having gone through that fire together. Our daughter turned 4 last month and asked me why grandma talks different from other grandmas at the park. I pulled her into my lap and told her the world is full of beautiful languages, and grandma's Russian is just one of them. She's growing up in an America where her bilingual brain is celebrated at preschool instead of feared, where her teachers ask grandma to teach them Russian words too. This is the country we're building one small victory at a time, where a phone call in Russian doesn't end with your mother coding in an airport hallway, while officers shake her pills like a maraca, where speaking another language makes you interesting, not suspicious, where love between people from different worlds isn't something to investigate but something to celebrate. Thanks for hanging out and wondering through all this with me. It's really been a journey to share together. I'll catch you next time, but until then, stay curious. Like the video. It helps more than you think.